morning, good evening, good afternoon, folks. The one and only V, the Guerrilla Economist, coming to you live on this edition of Hanging with Harley. And we have Harley Schlanger with us, a man that needs no introduction because he is the sane voice of reason in this crazy, mixed up world. And with that being said, Harley, how are you, sir? How's it going?
I'm doing pretty well.
Harley, what is new? What's going on? I mean, we're seeing what it looks like the Biden administration going down in flames. As I'm talking to you right now, 40,000 Americans have died from COVID, and that is 100% blamed on Biden. And he's already eviscerated several high-paying jobs. I think it's probably north of 50,000 and counting. I think we're approaching about 100,000 lost jobs, maybe even a million by the end of the following week. So he's off to a wonderful start, Harley.
He's just getting started.
Nice.
No, I think this is not anything that you and I didn't expect.
Right.
The idea that Joe Biden has a plan, there's a couple of mythologies that have to be, I think, broken up now. One is that Obama was a decent president. And I know very few of your listeners believe that, but a lot of Americans still believe that. And the evidence is to the contrary. Everything that people didn't like about Bush was worse with Obama, and
Yeah.
including everything people didn't like about Trump. And I'm talking now about liberals and Democrats. Obama was worse. He deported more people. He started more wars. He killed more people. And what would you expect when Obama's Sancho Panza becomes the president? He doesn't actually. Sancho Panza was a much better governor of an island than Biden could ever be a president.
Hmm.
Now, the question then is, what do you do if this guy is going to be in there for a while? Or if he's removed and Harris becomes the president? And that's what we're looking at in the LaRouche organization is what are the options we have to not just survive this period, but to turn it into something that's useful. And I think we have to continue the organizing process that was going on during the period of the Trump presidency, which means keep educating people on what the problems are, who caused them, who benefits from causing the problems, and what their weaknesses are, how to flank them. And I think if we take advantage of this, we're going to have a real learning lesson because Biden is going to screw things up so dramatically that it's going to become increasingly obvious that this is not the right option or direction for the country.
Absolutely right. What are what are how's the world and what are your contacts saying when they look at Biden and the contrast between him and how it was under Trump, number one, and number two, uh, we see this. What is China's take on this? What is Russia's take on this? We've seen all of a sudden protests erupting over a con man and a charlatan named Navalny in Moscow, and we know that there's all sorts of U.S. fingerprints over that, and we see what's happening with China, the whole Taiwan situation, which I think is being blown out of proportion to say the least. But Harley, what is your take?
Well, let me start with here in Germany, where most of my contacts, who when I first met them, I've been in Germany now for 4 years. Most of them were anti-Trump when I first got here. Many of them came to be some admirers of Trump, others who at least recognized that he was up against an absolute wall of tyranny. And very few of the people I talked to had any hopes for Biden. Now, there are people in Germany who thought maybe Biden's going to be an improvement. And I think that's changing very quickly. And one of the reasons it's changing is that Biden has immediately signed on to the Pompeo plan of shutting down the Nord Stream 2 pipeline deal with Russia. Now, I don't know how many Americans are familiar with this, but this is a deal that's been being built for the last 4 or 5 years. It includes not just Germany and Russia, but 10 other European nations. It's 95% completed. A little bit like the Keystone Pipeline, actually.
Right.
But it's nearly completed. And Pompeo and the British are organizing to shut down the pipeline at a point at which Germany's moving out of nuclear power and moving out of coal. So the Germans are getting a little bit of their nationalist dander up, which is a good thing. It's always good to see Germans become a little bit nationalistic because of the hangover from the Third Reich. And the German national anthem is immediately suspected of being a Nazi.
Hmm.
But the fact is that what Biden is doing is a good big favor to German nationalists because they're starting to say, who the hell is this guy to tell us where we can get our oil from? And so that's one thing. Now, the second thing is you may have seen this. Merkel, who usually has a personality like a day old pancake, uh, was quite lively in her denunciation of the censorship of the big tech in the United States. And it was not, and you wouldn't suspect Merkel of defending Trump, but what she was actually defending was the right of people to be freed from the censorship of Big Brother, of which the Germans have been the victim of the NSA in the past and the CIA. So there's a bit of a live kicking coming on from Germany. The person who was just nominated to be her replacement for the chairman of the Christian Democrats, and they'll be up for election in September, the guy Armin Laschet, came out denouncing the sanctions against Russia over the Navalny case, is denouncing the censorship, and is very un-Merkel like in his commitment to overturning the Green New Deal. He's called a man of iron and steel in Germany, or coal and steel. So, Germany is probably one of the most green of the industrialized countries, but the Green New Deal policy is even pushing German greenies to recognize that if you get rid of energy and electricity and try to switch to electric cars when you don't have the capability of enough power to even build the batteries for them, it's not going to work. Now, as far as Russia and China, look at what the Xi Jinping said at Davos, where they were expecting him to come in and bow down to the Klaus Schwab and the World Economic Forum, and he paid lip service to it. He said, "Look, China's going to clean up its environment. We're working on it right now." But what does he mean by clean up the environment? In 10 years, China's going to have half its electricity from coal and half from nuclear.
Right.
So they're not going with solar. They're producing solar panels for the idiots in the West who want to buy them.
Right.
In China, they're going with new technologies, plasma dynamics. They're trying to get helium-3 from the moon to
Yep.
establish a fusion capability. And then he also, Biden was saying that he wants to have a democracy conference, by which he means pull together all the old powers to isolate Russia and China.
This is stupid.
Well, what Xi did is he made Biden look stupid by saying, look, we need multilateralism, not unilateralism. And then Merkel again at Davos said that she's with Xi, not Biden on this. So that's interesting. And then Putin gave a really fascinating presentation where he said, if we don't have a policy of economic development and growth, we're going to have war. And feeding this war is this policy of censorship, which is taking away the freedoms and the traditional values of countries. And then he said something really quite interesting. He said, I wonder why big tech thinks it's okay to give support to Navalny's regime change in Russia, but shuts down supporters of Donald Trump in the United States.
Right.
And he
Right.
also then said that the new order that the Davos people are thinking about, well, so far it doesn't look so good. It's giving most of the wealth to the upper 1%, and that's a prescription for disaster. So I just wrote a paper on why it is that the Green New Deal is in trouble. It's based on a hideous uh, falsity of the science of so-called climate change. It's based on an economic incompetence that's murderous on energy production, the relationship of energy to physical goods production and productivity, and it's based on the idea that the private sector can run the economy, and the role of governments will be to repress the population when they rebel against the policies. Now, I think some governments are not going to do that. I don't think the Russians will do it. I don't think the Chinese will do it. I think Biden will try, but I think he's going to find that the American people are not so complacent anymore.
Right.
So I think we have an opportunity to pull together what LaRouche had called for a long time ago, which is a four power agreement of Russia, China, India with the United States to crush the interests of the British City of London finance, Wall Street, Hollywood, and Silicon Valley. Now, we don't have a leader for that in the United States right now. Now that Trump was uh, essentially booted out of office, Biden is not going to support that, but no one expected him to. We've got to somehow build a mobilization in the United States that will bring the United States out from under the thumb of the City of London and Wall Street. And I think in that case, this development the last couple of days with the hedge funds and the what's the name of the company?
GameStop.
GameStop. It shows the fragility of the financial system. All
Right.
of a sudden, the hedge funds are calling for regulation. So I think what we're seeing is we're in the midst of a phase shift, and some leaders around the world are starting to choose sides, and they're not going with Biden and the globalists. And it remains to be seen what we can do in the United States. But I think it's certainly I'm more optimistic than I was a week or 2 weeks ago.
Yes, exactly. I think a lot of people have awoken to the fact. I mean, not only what has occurred here with in the United States with the recent elections, but also the whole GameStop thing. We had people legitimately doing the same thing a hedge fund does.
Yeah,
You know, exact same thing. And all of a sudden, when they started kicking the teeth in, when they started beating breaking the backs of the hedge funds, all of a sudden the hedge funds want to cry about it. And in the ninth inning, they want to go ahead and they want to change the rules. You can't do that. You can't do that when the game is being played to stop the game and try to change the rules. And then Robinhood, who's right now their rating on every app store is like 1. If it could go below 0, it would. I mean, they've killed their business. They're done. Tens of millions of people have left Robinhood. They are finished. And now they've exposed Robinhood for what it was. It is a data analytics firm masquerading as a trading platform. And their job was basically feed trade data of what's happening in terms of trading sentiment to the larger hedge funds. And this is exactly what people have figured out. These people are morons, and to see these idiots, these billionaires crying on CNBC because we did the research. Listen, these jackwads who think they've done any sort of research, guys, it's 2020. A kid with Google has access to the same information and research that you do, and they could probably get it done faster. I
but
love it.
not only that, but they're not really doing research when they're getting free money from the Fed and
Exactly.
picking up every single weak sister stock on Wall Street and bidding it up with the
Yep.
free money.
Yep.
I mean, that's not brain surgery or rocket science. That's fraud,
Right.
and that should not be allowed. If you think about the difference between picking potential winners based on what would be good for the economy, what do we need? Do we need steel? Do we need construction? Do we need high speed rail? Or do we need more companies that are uh, in debt and worthless but can bid up their stock if you have free money? Well, I think it's fairly obvious, but it hasn't been obvious because people in the United States are so addicted to the idea that somewhere out there there's a scam by which I can make money, and I'm not corrupt like everyone else, but I'll do it to get the money, and then I'll step back and get back to my regular life. That's the way they suck people in. But I think this raid on the AMC and GameStop is quite interesting in that it shows that some people are beginning to get it and they're figuring out how to flip the game.
Yeah.
And that's useful. Now the question is, when someone says we need regulations, what kind of regulations? Are you going to give the regulations to the hedge funds, give them the right, which is actually, isn't that what Dodd Frank did? Let the hedge funds write the rules,
Yep.
and
Exactly.
the derivatives companies, of course it is. So what we need right now is the hellhound of Wall Street, like Ferdinand Pecora, who FDR brought in to crack the knuckles and the heads of the bankers. Uh, Now, is Joe Biden going to do that? I mean, Biden was basically born in a bank.
Yeah, he's Mr. Delaware LLC himself.
Yeah, I mean, as a political figure, that's where he comes from. That's where his family is. That's why it's no surprise to find that he's corrupt. But I think all these things point to something interesting. What we've learned in the last 4 years, because Trump stood up against the deep state, even though he didn't drain the swamp, he didn't finish them off, he didn't follow through with his pledge to break through against the Bush and Obama strategic policy. He opened the window and opened the door to let us see what's out there. And the attempt to try and demonize Putin on absolutely everything. I think people are now, if your dog's pregnant, it was probably Putin. I think people are now at the point where they're saying, yeah, so if Putin's so powerful, how come Russia isn't already running the world?
Exactly.
So, and I think the same thing's going to happen with China, because I know that what Trump was actually planning in a second term was to put the phase two trade talks on a rocket docket, get it done, and work again with China to deal with the North Korea question, finish the trade question, and then actually start selling more goods to China. And the demonization of China that's been being done by people like Steve Bannon, unfortunately, fit in with an election campaign theme of blaming China for COVID. But I think the idea that now instead of Russia, China's doing everything bad in the United States. I think people should figure it out. And I'm not saying everything China does is good. I'm just saying that in the same way it was immoral, corrupt, and stupid to blame Russia for all the things that the Democrats and the media were doing against Trump, the same people who did it against Russia are now doing it against China.
Yep.
So hopefully people will learn the lesson and we can get to the point where we can have serious dialogue about where the country has to go if we are going to reindustrialize, solve the problems of unfair trade practices, raise the living standards of the population, improve the education system, the infrastructure, the healthcare system, all of which things are desperately needed and can be done because the American system does work.
Yes, it does. Very well said. Harley, we're about coming to the end of the program. Any last things you want to say, and how can people follow you?
Well, again, what I just laid out on the Davos event, I think is really fascinating because if you look at what Klaus Schwab said in his book on the global reset, he said that he said it in a press briefing on why he wrote the book. He said that because of the corona crisis, he's very afraid that governments are going to reassert their authority. And he said that in terms of trying to deal with the pandemic. Now, what he really meant is that it's the private sector that has to take over everything. Because what is Davos? It's corporate CEOs from the financial interests, from the insurance companies, the big pharma, and so on.
Right.
They're trying to write the rules and control the terms of trade. And if governments do what they're supposed to do, which is to make sure there's a level playing field for small and medium business, for entrepreneurs, for inventors, for the research and development that's produced most of the breakthroughs in technology, well, that means you can't have monopolies like the big tech companies or the big pharma companies that control everything. And who's going to stop that? Well, that's a legitimate role of government. And again, I'm not saying government should tell you what color socks to wear. But government should be able to step in and say that people who are artificially distorting market practices, the way the hedge funds are doing, that shouldn't be allowed. So we've got an opportunity now to fix some things. And if people want to be in touch with me, you can contact me at my personal email, harleysch@gmail.com. And you can see my daily updates at the LaRouche Organization on YouTube. So that's how to find me.
Very well said. Harley Schlanger, the man, the legend. Thank you so much for joining us, Harley. And folks, again, subscribe, like, comment, and share. And at some point, we'll be back to live broadcasting on our regularly scheduled channel. And with that being said, CJ, take it away.